So we know that Israel rescued 4 hostages in Gaza last week. And what many people don't know, however, is the remarkable inside story of Israel's dramatic Gaza hostage rescue. And I want to read to you a more detailed account of what actually happened, what the mission was, because it's really dramatic. And but I assure you, you will find this gripping. Okay, this was an article in the Jewish Chronicle by Elon Perry, who is a journalist and former commando in the Golani Brigade of the IDF, the elite brigade. So he's very much informed and understands how these kind of operations work. So let me read to you what he said. On the 12th of May, Israel received intelligence about the location of 4 hostages in the Nusrat refugee camp area in the Gaza Strip. From that day on, every branch of Israeli intelligence was focused on the area 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, to locate the exact location. A team of undercover Mistar Aravim, units that assimilate into local populations to gather intelligence, were sent there, mainly in the local market of Nusrat. They have undercover operatives in Gaza, as by the way they do in Judea and Samaria, in the Palestinian territories. Their role was not only to gather intelligence from locals, but also to check information from the interrogations of captured terrorists. In addition, information was gathered by aerial observation and other sophisticated technological means. After 19 days of intensive cooperative intelligence gathering work, the combined units managed to compile solid and accurate information about the location of the Israeli hostages. It was discovered that the hostages were being held in 2 separate buildings in the same area. Noah Argamani was held in the first floor of one, and 3 other hostages were in another building, 800 meters away on the 3rd floor. At the beginning of June, this information was brought to the War Cabinet, and the Chief of Staff of the IDF and head of Shin Bet were asked to present a rescue plan. The intelligence was kept top secret. Even the other forces in Gaza, including senior commanders, were not informed about it. As the War Cabinet discussed options, the preparations and training for the operation began. In order to finally verify the information and to prepare the ground for the operation, another team of undercover soldiers, including several women dressed in hijabs and long black dresses, was sent into the Nusrat refugee camp. Pretending to be 2 Gazan families looking for a large house in Nusrat, they arrived in 2 cheap-looking old cars loaded with domestic items characteristic of those families displaced in the strip, such as mattresses and clothing identical to those of the locals. When the residents of the Nusrat camp asked the undercovers where they came from and what they were looking to do in Nusrat, they replied they had fled from Rafah due to, quote, deadly shelling from the Israeli army, and decided to rent a house in the area. Then they pointed to the building where Noah Argamani was being held. They showed one of the locals a large amount of cash and offered to pay 3 times the going rate for rent. The local agreed to help and within 3 hours found a large house on the very street where Argamani was held. This was only 800 meters away from where the other 3 hostages were held. A few days later, after settling into the house and getting to know the area, including shopping at the local market, and realizing that they did not arouse suspicion, the undercovers began their mission. Verifying the location where the hostages were held. They split into 2 teams. One team consisted of 2 commandos, a man dressed as a typical Gazan local, and a woman dressed in a long black dress and hijab. They began marching down the street towards the Al-Auda Medical Center, where, in a nearby residential building 200 meters from the hospital, Noah Argamani was held. The undercovers walked with complete confidence, as if they were walking down a street in Tel Aviv. To add to their authenticity, they stopped from time to time at stalls along the sides of the street, showing interest in the products while complaining about the difficult situation in Gaza. This was done in fluent Arabic with a perfect Gazan accent. Behind them walked 4 more undercover men, armed to give backup in case a Fauda-like situation occurred. Fauda in Arabic means unexpected chaos. The second team consisted of 4 female soldiers dressed as typical Arab women, one feigning being pregnant, carrying plastic bags full of food products and vegetables. They walked in 2 pairs. A young Muslim woman is not allowed to walk around alone. Towards a nearby residential building where on the 3rd floor the 3 male hostages were held. Behind them walked 4 more undercover men armed to give them backup. Meanwhile, 5 other members of the undercover team stayed at the house to guard it, and make sure the teams had not been exposed and that no nasty surprises would await them. 3 hours later, at the prearranged time, the two teams came back to the rented house and began to process this information they had obtained. Now it was confirmed the 4 hostages were being held in 2 homes of Gazan families. The force commander confirmed to Israel that the 2 locations were correct. The cabinet decided to act. 28 fighters from the Yamam, a commando unit that specialized in fighting terrorists and rescuing hostages, began training on 2 specially built models that replicated the 2 buildings where the hostages were held. After 3 days of training, the commander of the force informed the IDF Chief of Staff, Herzi Halevi, who then informed the Minister of Defense, Yoav Gallant, that they were ready to carry out the operation. After Prime Minister Netanyahu had been informed and given permission to launch the operation, it was able to proceed. On Thursday night, 15th of June, the undercovers were ordered to leave the area of Nusrat refugee camp without arousing suspicion, although 4 remained to keep an eye on the buildings to make sure that the hostages were not transferred to another location. Only at this time were senior Israeli commanders and other cabinet members informed about the operation. On Friday morning, 6th of June, the 28 commanders of the Yamam unit began making their way in 2 teams towards the 2 buildings in Nusrat refugee camp. To maintain the element of surprise as much as possible, the unit's fighters travelled, hiding in 2 trucks. Just before 11 a.m, the commanders arrived with precise timing at the 2 targets and awaited the order to attack. Observations and technological surveillance measures from the IDF aircraft reported that the area was clean with no suspicious movements near the 2 buildings. The information and live coverage of the alleys and the 800-metre-long street that separated the 2 target buildings were transmitted directly to the screens in 2 command and control rooms in Israel from which the operation was being overseen. At 11 a.m. exactly, the commandos received the order to go ahead and storm both buildings simultaneously in full coordination to prevent the terrorists from endangering the hostages and the entire operation. The Israeli soldiers eliminated the terrorist guarding Noura Gamani and within 6 minutes had rescued her, unharmed, from the apartment. They then took her to a waiting helicopter that immediately flew her back to Israel. But while the rescue of Al-Gamani went smoothly, the task of rescuing the other 3 hostages on the 3rd floor of the 2nd building became complicated. They were held in the home of Dr. Amal Al-Jamal, a medical doctor who was a Hamas activist. His son Abdullah, a journalist who had written for Al Jazeera, was also staying in the apartment. By the way, I assume these constitute the civilians of Gaza, the innocent civilians. Anyway, the article continues. Some of the commandos used a ladder to enter directly into the room where the 3 hostages were held. This coincided with the entry of the rest of the force, who came up the stairs from the main entrance of the building. But Commander Arnon Zamora's team, which broke into the apartment at the head of the force, encountered massive fire from around 30 Hamas terrorists in the apartment. They fired with machine guns, threw grenades, and some even fired rocket-propelled grenade missiles at the surprised Israelis. This is how Arnon Zamora was killed. The fact of the presence of 30 terrorists in the apartment had not been known to the undercover teams, who had reported the information about the hostages' location back to Israel. It is assumed that the terrorists arrived at the apartment only that morning or the night before to strengthen the guarding of the 3 hostages. Nevertheless, the experienced Israeli commando fighters were not deterred by the deadly surprise and continued to fight the terrorists with determination at a close range, joined by the other fighters who were waiting outside the apartment. The 3 hostages had to hide in the bathroom of the apartment, protected by several Israeli fighters during the battle. There was no way to leave the apartment due to the massive unexpected gunfire, as it might endanger the hostages. After a long face-to-face battle, the Israelis managed to eliminate all the terrorists in the apartment, but during the shooting from dozens of guns inside a crowded 2-room apartment, Arnon Zamora was hit and lay on the floor bleeding while 3 medics and a doctor leant over him under heavy fire, trying to save his life. Meanwhile, dozens of terrorists emerged from the tunnels around the building and began to fire at the Israeli fighters with machine guns and RPG missiles. The Israelis started making their way out of the building, several of them carrying Arnon Zamora on a stretcher, running through smoke-filled alleys in the nearby market, which was crowded with thousands of Gazans who would not have hesitated to lynch them. The Israeli forces tried, under constant fire, to get to the rescue vehicle that was waiting for them, but it was hit by 2 RPG missiles. The commander of the Operation Israel then activated Plan B, the rescue plan that had been prepared in advance, a daring operation under massive, very close fire from the enemy, covered by Israeli fire from ground, sea and air. With the help of tanks, hundreds of soldiers from the Golani and Givati infantry brigades and paratroopers charged on foot into the refugee camp, fighting face-to-face battles with Hamas terrorists, while Navy ships covered them from the west and Air Force helicopters from the east. Fire from the air hit the terrorists just 10 metres from the Israeli soldiers. The reinforcement forces and the Air Force managed to isolate the battle scene, providing a safe escape route for the main force escorting the 3 hostages. At the end of an exhausting and continuous battle, the Israeli fighters eliminated all the armed threat in the battle area. Hamas claimed that during the rescue operation in the crowded streets of the refugee camp, 274 Palestinians were killed. However, the IDF says that 104 Palestinians were killed or wounded, all of whom were Hamas terrorists or armed civilians who collaborated with the terrorist organisation. Again, just to pause for a second, so when the media report it as if there's all these civilians killed, innocent people, I'm sorry, but it is so clear that they faced a barrage of attacks from trained military figures, people that were supporting Hamas, and quite frankly, all the deaths in this conflict are the responsibility of Hamas. And we see, by the way, huge support for Hamas, even now, among the population of Gaza. And so we have absolutely no apology to make in terms of doing what we need to do to protect Israel and to reclaim the hostages. After the battle, the article continues, the 3 abductees who had kept their cool throughout were led by the fighters to one of the Israeli helicopters waiting for them and flew them to Israel. Meanwhile, the Air Force planes bombed the building, which collapsed within seconds. The Special Forces soldiers then boarded the other 2 helicopters, and that took off back to Israel. Attempts to revive Arnon Zamora continued on the short flight, but he was pronounced dead on arrival in hospital. And Arnon Zamora is a hero of Israel. And the fact that he gave his life rescuing these hostages, it's the ultimate service and it's the ultimate price. And it is so painful that this had to happen. I just want to get a picture up of him so that you can see his face. So you can see a hero of the Jewish people. This is him. May his memory be a blessing. We thank you for your service. And quite frankly, this whole story just shows the extent to which Israel wants to go towards protecting her people. And I was really struck by the words that we heard of the IDF saying to the hostages, "It's Sal, it's the IDF, we've come to take you home." These are words that would not really be uttered in prior centuries when the Jewish people were under threat. And this is a remarkable story of heroism that needs to be told, because we just see the headline about the rescue operation. You don't know all the details, and you don't know the smears. You don't know that there's so many smears and lies surrounded by what happened. Israel has absolutely every right to do whatever she chooses to do in response to this horrific massacre and mini genocide attempt that occurred on October 7th.
Hi, thank you so much for watching. To watch another one, click here. To stay up to date with all our content, click here to subscribe. And if you're able to, you can help support JTV to grow and grow by clicking join below this video, where you can become a member and get perks including early access to videos and private live discussions with me. But most of all, you'll be partnering with us on our mission to change the world.